Hey guys, it's Cassandra Williams with EI360 with Fast Track Friday. So today we're going to really talk about thinking about developing student leadership programs. If you're not even considering developing student leadership programs, side-eye. Make sure you incorporate students in the very fabric of your school, and let me tell you how. Okay, I have three major reasons on why student leadership matters, right? Critical developmental skill for our students. Of course, it builds great communication between leaders and other peers. Think about empathy, collaboration with other students in the class, problem-solving skills. There's so much demand for this, especially today. Of course, improve academic outcomes. When students know they have a ability to become leaders of the school, it shows increased participation through their leadership and more of a sense of belonging. And then, of course, we know my favorite, social emotional growth. Really thinking about being resilient in these experiences, being aware of themselves and others. These are just much of the core components of social emotional learning. Okay, now I put this on there, effective student leadership models, but you don't always have to start from these models, but this is a great way to start your initiative. You take your student council, you think about how do we have them participate, and so they're talking about these things already, so how do we have them participate in our school budget, sit on committees that we serve on, right? Thinking of how we can help and how they can become a real influence in the change of our school. Think about peer mentorship, right? How do we pair some of the older students have graduated, I call them like alumni, with the students that are up and coming, whether it's regular check-ins, thinking about highlighting events and helping promote events. Cross-age mentoring, I think, is not promoted enough as something that can be done to help with the culture of the school. And last but not least, service projects. Really thinking about having students lead those initiatives in the service project area, whether they're working with empathy and classroom, really thinking about how do we make a real-world impact and how our students are making a difference every day they're in school. So I'm all about having students take on ownership and leadership within the school. So thinking about what are your opportunities that you have available now. So some of us are doing project-based learning. Think of project-based teams where each team is collaborating. There's a special initiative that they're focused on. And then, thinking about having them with this long-term commitment, or it could be short time, and then they can cycle out. And sometimes I've had students pick the next group of leaders that they want to have replace them, right? So whether they're having school dance committees, teams on playgrounds to help monitor, to support, and helping with events, like these are all great ways students can participate. Then you have your digital leadership team and your initiatives. Think of how do we roll out some of these initiatives. They don't have to necessarily be teacher-led. What if some of them are student-led? So how do we empower our students to not only understand the tool, but understand how the tool is incorporated into their culture, their community, and their everyday life? So yes, students can be doing their own news productions and creating those scripts for the teams. Yes, they can be peer technology coaches to support different generations or different levels of students. And then, of course, they could be content creators, right? So at one elementary school, one of the things that principals struggle with is keeping up with the content. Why not let students start promoting the content or pushing out the content? And then, of course, there's a checklist of like what you should do, what you should not do, but also thinking about like who checks it before it goes out, right? We can have much more content, and it's all through the lens of students. And then, of course, if we don't do this enough, cross-grade leadership, right? Having other students be leaders in other spaces, whether it's fostering a school community, unity, diverse age groups, walking students in class, right? Reading programs, STEM programs, school spirit committees. How many times have you, educators or teachers or coaches, sat on these committees and it was very leadership driven, right? Many times we don't get input from our very people who this is going to affect. So now we have to think about what is the real world success in student leadership and what does it look like in action? So Bridgewater Elementary, Blue Ribbon School, thinking about what do we need to do to incorporate our students, 5th grade student council, where they're leading the community outreach and school improvement initiatives, right? So thinking about other measurable outcomes, how can we incorporate school leadership within academic achievement? I can think of several things that we could do to really incorporate our students into the classroom and into the fabric of the school. So I'm all about that life. You need to start today. Start now. Start this year. You should be pumped and motivated to start this year. So really thinking about what are the practical action steps that we can start today, right? Of course, you have to start with a needs assessment. How do you got to audit to see what's going on, what you're doing, to see what you can implement. And also thinking about what are your current leadership roles that you have right now? What are your clubs? How do we look at the sports? How do we look at the arts? What are the classroom projects, the end of the year projects, right? Thinking about how do we tackle those different opportunities in our classrooms. And then create new pathways, whether we're expanding on a program or we're launching a new program. What does it look like? Who's going to take the initiative? Who's going to be the support for this program? And then train. Constantly we're training and supporting. One of the things that teachers said is like they're overwhelmed. They don't want to have to train a new group for this. So what happens when the students train the next generation of students to do A, right? So thinking of how do we put in those systems and helping students with that. As also there's been various schools like peer mentorship. What does that look like for mentoring students who are having conflict in the schools? And then always celebrate success, right? Being able to recognize our leaders publicly, announcements in the halls, right, of the great work that they're doing, whether it's in the newsletter for the parents, award ceremonies that are quarterly, so there's constant rewards for the people that are doing the work. Really thinking about these are the things that help motivate our students to get them excited and to help train the next generation of the students. I am all about that inclusive leadership culture, and you should be too. Really thinking about who do we pick. I think in times in the past, we've picked PTA students, PTO students, parent-teacher association or organization students, the ones that are deemed to be okay, but really thinking about how do we get a diverse population in student body, thinking about race, gender, abilities to be able to be a part of these leadership teams. Also think about multiple ways to get in, right? Pathways, different interests, different levels of leadership, right? What does leadership look like for Tier 4 versus Tier 1? Maybe you're introducing a student to leadership as opposed to, all right, you're running the social media channel for our page, right? So thinking about what are your tiers? How do you best roll this out? And always, I say there's nothing worse than you say, hey, you guys are going to control social media, and then you don't put anything that they create, right? So really being able to not only train your students on some of the things that you would like to see, so they incorporate that and some of the lenses that they see, but really thinking about taking feedback and being just honest about some of the supports that they will need and being open to new ideas and opportunities that they put forth. And then, of course, scaffolding and support. We're not going to throw them to the wolves, but they do need the help and the guided gradual release to make sure that we build confidence and they can, just be enlightened by some of the skills that they have taken on and that they've learned. I don't know about you, but here are a couple of pillars that I would like to think that we are using to implement specific changes, right? To see change. But what we've noticed is attendance has changed behavior, sometimes not so much the behavior incidents, but academic achievement, school connectedness, right? Really thinking about the sheer fabric of the school and being able to monitor some of these changes to make sure that students will continue to thrive in the space. Now, with everything that you want to try, of course, there are going to be some challenges. So really thinking about how do we sustain this, right? One year we have this dynamic teacher who leads it, and the next year we can't find anybody to take this on. Really thinking about what are your structures in place to make sure that this is sustainable. This is something we can continue on. Of course, time management. Now, granted, it is time. It takes time for our students to be out of the classroom to take pictures or maybe it's after school activity, but really thinking about how you schedule your time for students to be out, leadership activities, what hours are they going to take on this initiative. And then thinking about inclusive participation, right? We want to make sure that it's not only the PTA students that are getting into these programs, right? All students can be nominated or maybe a trial run for some students that are maybe struggling with something. So really thinking about what are the various entry points that they can have to where it's not the same type of student that is doing this. And of course, you have to have some type of buy-in from staff because you're not going to be able to do this all principals. You have to have some type of connected leadership, some type of academic goals tied to it to make sure you are continuously growing. All right, principals, now it's time to build your legacy. What is your legacy going to be when you leave, right? Thinking about how does that look? Of course, we're always about that. You need to start small. You can start from those groups, but begin with what is your school's specific need, whether you can look at your goal, your vision, thinking about like digital, how can we do some of this online, and how do we build momentum for, eventually to expand to other areas. What does it look like to build capacity? How do we train our staff for these programs? What is the professional development that's necessary for these programs to sustain? And what does the planning look like, right? What are the rubrics and all the things? So we know the expectation, we know the goal. And last but not least, of course, institutionalize. Once these programs are set in stone and they're successful, we can start developing other opportunities with this idea in mind through grade levels, through staff, through changes in staff and faculty. So really thinking about the ripple effect that it can cause, and it can allow for your culture to build and continue to grow. Hope these tips help. Talk to you later for more. Bye.